ane ta 가서 하나 녀모 몸보시라 녀모를 몸보시라네 녀모 그렇게 solang아서 문제 타도 안에 수수절 녀모 끼요바데 바로 그거 하고와도 하모고와 아니 수수절 녀모 끼요바 하모고와 근데 녀모들 링다만다 몸보시
넘버요래 디소소가 하고야 비서
녀모도 저 끼요데 녀모도 수수로 녀모 끼요바 수수 하모고 아니 녀모를 시대 수수절 끼요데 아니 바로 이제 막 하고와도 먹고와
okay. So last time we talked a lot about the afflictions and sort of how afflictions are generated, and and that there's different afflictions, like that there's afflictions or negative minds, right, that you can generate that are obvious to other people, right? Or there's also afflictions that one can can arise in one's mind that maybe other people don't know that are arising.
아니 pena 수수절 녀모 끼 아요 수수 하고와티 카르잖아. 수수 절 녀모치마 수수가 수수를 장직제 아니 테니스 칸논도 코네살로토나 수수 절 녀모치요메데 아니 수수 하고아 녀모르 모셔지 텐디잖아 하고레스 이나요 녀모르치 베 참고 텐디 하모고 텐디요.
So when we talk about these afflictions or these negative minds, we say that you should really, look in your mind, research your mind, sort of really investigate and be aware of the afflictions, pay attention, be aware of the afflictions that are arising. And many of these afflictions, it's very obvious, or you can tell. But there's also very subtle afflictions that you maybe don't know or won't realize are arising.
아니, pena ta dochaandabu, controldabu, ngajandabu, 수수절 제요데 매 바로 보고 나서가 남자라더니 뒤질라네 컨트롤 같은 도차 같은데 유녀모를 가시요 바로 보고 하고 가시 초빠전 하고 가시 초빠마체 남자라더니 하고
그래 남길라
남자 pena ngandoji 컨트롤자노 동바마 보자도 tel라더니 하고 어텐데요 요레스.
So we can say that there are these more obvious or manifest afflictions, such as like anger, jealousy, or pride, right? That if you really have these things, it's very likely that other people are going to notice, right? They might notice just by sort of your actions or just by your expression, your appearance, right? That these things are arising.
Tenoje ngaso nochu chengarejena ti gelane luya chonchik stanzato tonyo tobe luza tiso ngaso susuroni kas gelakiana susuroni hakwa mato paropoka hakwa hajo kabures.
However, when we talk about things such as like love or compassion or like the wisdom realizing, emptiness and these kinds of things, right? If you're practicing these things on the inside, it might be difficult for people external to you, other people to really know that's going on.
Pena ni jele chonchik samayo ani tonyo to luyo zana ngaro ko amato ne tamme jemba chele shena nga tonyo to so ni jele chonchik sayo zana haro bugane yichi che amato ani to kapures.
I, for example, might say, for example, if I had generated bodhicitta or if I had realized emptiness, right? It's actually going to be very difficult for other people to just to see that, to know that, that has happened, right? Other than just believing, having trust, right? That it's not something what someone can necessarily see.
Tende so ngaso nomba sonje pi chuzena, non chuzate, ane rikashirela ane pa yichi kyombache yichi chene. ane tende chegwa che to yana rikashi de karazana ane sauluto susuka na kyo te pecho to o tende chene ne jongwa tende chirasa.
So when we study Buddhism, there's some things that we have to really just trust or take on faith, and then there's some things that we have to really think about and analyze, and we can really establish through sort of thinking and analysis.
Ne pena tangaso pichate sono mombo shedati 수제 마음바 타바타여라 성지야여라 전식 사회 다서 몸부지 가서 이치제 어떤지 제마도 가서 도도아요 말해서 배나 신사 다나 갱아도 원시와 원시주 원시 원버시 바트스 갱아 갱아 라이지 jenga to ngo shela so pa yore ze tati til yosar ze yichi chama to ngaso dawchi ka ha ko mares teres ni bat ngaso mombuchi yichi chene tindi charas.
So, for example, in Buddhism, right, we talk a lot about like liberation, then the Buddha mind, the omniscient mind of a Buddha. These are things we mostly have to just sort of accept, right? For at least in the beginning, that these are possible. We also talk about things like the 5 types of birth, like being born as like God, sort of being born as a person, and I don't know the other 5, but these sort of different 5 types of births. There's also these, what we talk about based on if you had developed really strong concentration, you get essentially these sort of clairvoyant powers, such as seeing other people, knowing other people's thoughts, or knowing past lives and things, right? And these are things we have to just trust that they're real.
ane also tonyo tombani za to ane tende za tiso ane ichi kyomba cha tiso ichi cha den pemare suji tombani to to ane tende to ta tel salo to ne tombani za na tombani yeto kanje res ne di pena mitapa res na mitapa yeto kanje tende res na tende yimbi junse kanje res tiso salo to ane pilo mombo che tende salo to ne agwama to ichi kyomba ke che den
However, there are these things that are really important, really central to Buddhism, these ideas like emptiness, dependent arising, impermanence, right? These are things that actually, just taking them on faith is not actually helpful, right? And these are things that we are able to actually think about and establish through thinking, through rational process, right? Through really looking in the books and then thinking about them, we can establish these things. And actually just sort of trusting that they exist doesn't do us any good, in fact.
Ne me mombo jal kanga karte yore tombo nga nonchu jongwe nonchu chege ta nonchu chayo na nga sono ngoshe ta yore ane chola galang thonla ta yore ane jene za chi ta yore ta kebu yore zen jene to lhanto sujelo taba yore keba yore sujelo keba yore ane ta mombo chi shedera ane tangone ikeboche sareta sane ane no chuche kache ane pore ne thongche ta teso gelekya lilab kale khabura
it's good to
lam to so ta ne ngoshe tha za ta ne jene tha za atiso tombo house ka chikebonda yeno ja ane no chuche is a jon ane kale te ja ne pore kale jamu to thongche ane ta zema isare sane kare jane nga jene ta de kya je ota tendi chene yo thong chene yo pa tawa loza direct joa yoras.
So something that happens sometimes with people is they get excited about Buddhism. Oh, I'm going to study Buddhism, and they study about, we start to talk about these things like this, the 5 paths. You have the path of preparation, accumulation, meditation, right? You have these pathway minds, really. These are sort of attainments in your mind, right? That you can achieve these clairvoyances, all of these different things that we talk about on the path, and people start studying, and then, then after a while they haven't actually achieved any of these things, and they get sort of disappointed and leave, right? So.
Kare kozo ta kandilora zane no shute sonolo zemarendo zane nga kozo shiano je chaitinga jude keumundo chitendela.
They might think that, for example, because I haven't been able to generate these things, that they're lying, that this isn't real, right? I mean, that's a risk.
Tendeza nga nonshu za kocho ne mugen toame, mombuchi mugen toame ayisoza, ane yishiche kaleja tiriche got ajo kechambures.
So, particularly when you're studying Buddhism, and particularly as beginners, so many of these things are hidden to us, and so in the beginning, you really do have to. There's a lot of things where you do have to sort of trust the teachings as you go along.
ane pena ta nga su mugen toa yo satanda pena litsache kashi litsandama da sene zubu dibu chando litsache zubu dibu cha tendiche ni kashi litsache ne zubu dibu cha yo ban thone ne nganda bu che litsache ne nganda je zubu dibu cha ma to na kaptere zene ne litsache ne zubu dibu cha mendo zene ko te mares tate 수순 zubugun jongo mundo mato 파셔테 리체스네 zubudi보도네 치치 장가요라 치치 장가 치치 채널 치치 채널 안에 자디보도네 가시 따져도 뜻 자디보도 어떤데 정말 미근 통화요서자 아니 수수문에 만져나요 다 수수문 좀 와서마도 봐줬더니 차요한테 미근 통화요서자 이치제도 그래서
So but in normal life, for example, you think we look at things like, oh, you see somebody that goes to the gym a lot or works out a lot, and then suddenly they're losing weight, they're getting big and strong, and you can see these obvious benefits or obvious effects, or like somebody that knows like that plays sports, like or a horse rider, all of these sort of skills and things. You can watch them, right? Even if you don't do it yourself, you can see someone who's doing this and who has sort of acquired that skill, right? And so you can see it directly, and it's very easy to understand and believe.
노초도 텐데 미근 통화매야 있어서 아니 수수고 만jo 레전에 이시전에 깔려야 계신보라마 맞아 딱이 쯤어잖아 이제는 미근 통화한테 텐데 하주 커버래 배낭이 gel어 또반 통보용아 가제시가 요새나 나라롱고 마토 이제바가 통화용 말해서.
So for Buddhism, because these kinds of what we're talking about, these kinds of attainments can't be seen directly. It's really important to study in this analysis, really digging into the real meaning of these things and really trying to understand them and really trying to get it. That is really important. For example, like if, can you tell me like
단단한 스테모스야도 대소던 레서치 라마단도 대소 먹은 통화여서 근데 다 노슈자한테 산살은 수수고 만져나 예시제네 딘딩원이 제거한 계신 말마도 아주 초마도 미근 통화요 말했어.
Yeah, so basically that. Yeah, so that it's because in the things that we're obtaining in Buddhism are not like, going to the gym and getting big and strong or these things that you can see obviously, right? It's really important that you do your own study, your own analysis, and in the beginning you develop some trust and some faith in these teachings.
아니 단다데 이선서 로베 촐로기 가르소 난다 사발라 만톤차나 메바메스 만톤차나 메바메zen 가르 수수고 만토비 gen색 제네 메바레제는 드요 말레스 몽부지 가르에서 멘두자 가르에서네 메비 gen색 가르샤레서 수수고 만토차네 수수고 만토나 제간 토아도 요아든지 몽부 요 초레스 근데 있어서 만토차나 메 로베 촐로 촐로 난다 사와 만토차나 메바메 텐다 텐
So there's a famous quote by Dharmakirti that says that just because you can't see something doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? There's many things that we cannot see that other people know and can see that exist, right? So this is from the Pramanavartaka. It's sort of one of the core sort of Buddhist logic books. So just because you can't see something, don't assume it doesn't exist.
아니 다 녀목거든 된지라다 가성가서 디정은 논에 맞다나. 다 예주.
So we are on page. Can I cover this again?
되네.
식다.
마리바.
So we will start on page ignorance. Okay, so in the English text we are on page 89. There's this recognizing the afflictions, and this list of afflictions. We're on D, ignorance.
So he's like, do I need to buy a text?
We can send you the PDF if you want that. Actually, I think I have your.
89?
Yeah, I'll send you the PDF. I can't post the whole PDF in the group for copyright reasons, but I can send it to you directly. It's fine. I just had you in here a while ago. Here you are. Okay.
Oh, I can send her. I find her.
You found her? You got it? Okay.
But the internet is very slow. It's
Right.
nobody understands. Okay.
Do you have Shide's internet?
인터넷 좀.
Or maybe later, so can just listen to it.
It should be fairly straightforward.
Yeah.
그래서.
You're
인터넷 요래래.
right.
Yeah, sometimes you
Video,
off to the
Here's
back
my
of the
Wi-Fi.
room.
Is
Yeah.
yeah, so.
아니 단단가서 다 가서 컨트롤 코드 디콘 양체 시에차지 다 마리바. Maripa zati karare zana. Chito maripa zati chito ta dibugu nishana mantomba. Yuangu puti so mantomba. Mantom tonga to mantom azera. Mantom was. And kar mantore zana dembaji nile legend naja. And conscious ko ranjeti sol. Mantom tomachi jeba maripa jeba. Mantana tonga tom.
So when we talk about ignorance, if we want to say what we mean by ignorance in a very, very simple fashion, we can say it's simply that it's like not seeing, right? It's like not seeing something properly, or not seeing something that's true. In this case, what we're really talking about is not seeing the Four Noble Truths, not seeing karma, and not seeing the three jewels, right? Not understanding or not seeing those things.
Demba san laso, demba laso pala, me legend laso pala, legend yosa mare sato, consciosa yosa mare, sanjiza yosa mare, chambate, nijiza yosa mare, and tesaza jura, or tears in the batilane, tesas, count the ship, tesate.
And when we talk about doubt here, this is an afflictive doubt. What we're talking about is this doubt into whether things like the Four Noble Truths are true, whether karma exists, whether past and future lives exist, or whether the three jewels exist or not. That's the kind of doubt we're talking about.
Ane jiktate rendora, jiktate karerezena, ane susu ngato ngaya zena, susu lapa la sopa, ane pombo la sopa, namene ngarez, ngaywa, ngi lapare, ngi pombore, ane ti ngarez, ane tindi zatelan jikta. Ngi lapa, ngi pombo la ra. Ta nga zaten zugu sa maya yeso so, ne karchane ngi lapa. Jikta tiki nga to ngaya ma ngi lapa zato, ne nga zane, tila tene nyomo chaya rese. Pana nga lapa ne, ane nga shibachi, nga yapu ye, tite, ngi lapa te naso, ne ndumundu, ngi lapa te yapundu chindum, papa te yapumundu tene, tindila tene nyomo chaya jira, jikta, jiktola tawa.
So then the next one is the sort of afflictive view of the transitory collection. And what this is by observing any of the five aggregates, right, particularly our body, you develop this afflictive, this exaggerated mind of I and mine, right? So you think you have this exaggerated sense of I, or you think the body is yourself, and from that you develop afflictions, and also you have this afflictive sense of mind, this over solid sense of mind, from which also afflictions can be generated.
Ne tartazat karazana jikta ka zombe datela mane ne ti tabata to chebatawa o tindela yona tanta tondura yona chenta tondura o tire tarta.
The view of grasping at extremes here, G on the bottom of page 49. So the view of grasping at extremes is another afflictive view, and it's two ways we can understand this: the extremes of existence. So you have the extreme that nothing exists, right? You have this extreme of nihilism, and then you have the other side of that extreme. You have this extreme of sort of view of permanence, or this eternalistic view.
Ne tawan chonze zene jikta ton tarta lotasan koron la mune tela koron la tene jo pombo jora ngaso pombo tela mune ne te pombo de yapundu tati jusan tela tene suku pombo datan zene te yapundu chaten resini patela ane tawan chonze jikta ton tarta lotasan koron to te ta konlan la tene jo tawa pui pombo las pana su ngaso nyomo momboji la tene susu pombo de shibaji yapo ye tene susu pombo la chaje kya jora chaje kya te nyomo jira o tatela.
So here we have H holding the extreme view as supreme. Yeah, the English is a little strange, but holding the extreme view as supreme, it's basically on the basis of any of the three previous views. you develop sort of an exaggerated sense of importance. You know, viewing your body or yourself, you develop an exaggerated sense of importance.
Pena ane tsutratojin chonzezena tati tsutratojin chonzezena pena chiroba kashigi ane santeji nguji taw susula ane santeji nguji tala tane santeji nguji la tan kewa chiza kewa niza kewa ngama togre tindesa tintote ane katuita de kewa ngama tene bajonda to longon tanda bu kewa yimba tona ane o ta bajo to tati litente yabushaba yisarez ane chindala ne tisoko litenge cheto to tisoko litete tonto nyane gonjani deajora o tindabo tsurata jin chonze tombo tanda ngoshi taw ne ngoshi ya tawde kewa chiza niza kewa ngamanda tingamanda tindijin tong de kewa ngamata ne tanda to pachonda logo kewa yusu o ta nga tanda liten mali yabushilendo tilat kewa ma tak kewa to ane pajo kewa tilatene yisare tene ane tindi gauja tsra pajo to ta o tindi choto tino kara jaduna chacha povi tsra to chache to ane tanda ga chawi tsra damba to nyam tindi chajora atira papone ne tanda tsra yabu yondo chene dajora kanda tindi jando yana tsra to jin sonze tagi konda shano je o tindi mombo sonyor.
So the next one here translated is holding ethics and conduct as supreme, and so we can have an example of this. Some other holders of other belief systems, for example, think, oh, I'm going to meditate on these really deep concentrations, and you know, this body that I have, this basis of this life is really not very good. I really want to have the body or the basis of like a cow or a horse. And so, you know, in 1 or 2 lives, if I really am able to concentrate really well, I'll achieve that. As an example, there's also here when we talk about in the book, what does it say? What is it? Well, it determines abandoning corrupt morality, manner. Oh, you don't have the book. Oh, you got the book now. What does the book say? Is having an afflictive intention. Okay, so I think also you can say it's basically holding that ethics and the conduct alone, right, is the most important thing and will deliver you from samsara. That's another way of looking at it.
ane lobarta lotati ane tsinga cheto ane li jindri la sopa la yomare zene kawanta bado ane onshu la sopa ane ngasu jite chepa puto ane ngasu soma ge ju onshu la sopa re zene ane tindi tawan zea chura lobata.
So wrong views, right, is having this incorrect mind that says, you know, that the Four Noble Truths are not true, that there wasn't a Buddha, or holding, you know, beliefs in the other gods like Shiva and Vishnu and things like that.
ane tizi tanda nyomo jinse tati yanche tiki kaso nga su nyomo jedon ane nyomo jita susu ne jisa zane ane tison du diti shebares.
So up till now we've sort of been going through the different categories of afflictions, the different type of afflictions, and now we'll start talking about how the afflictions arise.
ane ta tiso la tene ane nyomo nga so la nyomo kandi chiga yore zana pena sarawla marawla jiyora sarawla marawla zana san chuchu chize demba jebala pet nakoma chaba sarapa samarapa zara nakoma sacha te ziyo pet nakoma im tie kausane tisona nga langwa tisona tabandra tindi chocho de ne o tisol tane nga so o drindu zene ne nga so jino kia tindi lun charge yora dire tene charge yora tinoje ne nyomo tiso la tene nga so la tindi luncha tsoma nyomo tiso la tene kichi yoras.
So here we have the stages of the arisal of the afflictions on page 90. It's at the bottom of page 90. And so the example here is, for example, when you know, if you're walking along and right at dusk, you know, right as it's getting dark, but there's still just enough light to see, you see like a rope or something or a stick or whatever, it doesn't matter, coiled up in the road, and you suddenly see it, you know, and you get really scared. You think, oh no, it's a snake, right? So in that same way, right, that we have this sort of mistaken view, and from that mistaken view, we are generating these afflictions.
ane tik kar sogoyo razane pena mari patike nga so hama ko ache ane suzuku pombo to dare tene ane mari patike wangi suzuku pombo kon necha jana mando neto soma hama ko ane pombo to dare tene nga so salung khara jora 어떤 pena tabati dare tene salung khara nga so pombo ti dare tene that kara jana konle shepi maripa to tela tene nga so char de yoras.
So to think about this, right? So we, in that same way, right? What happens is that we mistake the body for the self, in the way that you're mistaking the rope for the snake. And so through this mistaken perception, right, is what we're calling ignorance here, right? Through this mistaken perception or this ignorance, then you have these negative minds arise.
아니 tipo Tsewang na ngas tratela.
Does anybody have any questions? Do you have any questions?
I think it's a silly question on my part. Maybe I don't understand this.
Come on.
Are you not your body at all?
Kirangi pumbo mune di gyacha gyayo marebe.
아.
Ko kirangi pumbo mebe. Kine yomare.
pombo yores.
Kirangi pumbore.
ngaro ko pombo mares. ina ngala pombo yores. Karara ngaso pombo te ngare tene.
Di contact pumbo gi dewa kare.
konza to pombo zen. pombo zati kanti rezana ne ngaso komba tabo nikang. konza te dabu tabo. konza zete ngaso navshi zen amado tichiora. ti komba tika dabu tabo res. ngaso pombo diora. pombo te ne tanda ngaso ndreko komba tabo. hakozo. tin tabo koni. tindigan pombo te dama res. kaso pombo te daeson ti komba la sobati konda ye go anaje. pena ngaso ndrembo to. kasi pombo te da ngaso pombo te ngaso daesona ne ngaso ti komba la sobati konda ye go tabre. pena ndrembo to ndrenko tabres. pombo to Naushida Gozazana.
No, from the Buddhist perspective, you are not your body, you're not your aggregates, right? So you can think of it like sort of the owner of the house and the house, right? And that they're different. And so that if you were the house, you couldn't be the owner of the house, right? Like that there's that kind of relationship. So in Buddhism, you're definitely not understood to be the aggregates of the body.
Penangaso nonchino mombachi, zime, dame, jime, rume, pombom. 몸부지 매라 대요라 티페 여공원이 파쇼 촌이 매제 대요 말했어. 그래서 자체바지 요래 되나. because 롱원이 잡아도 롱그 체니지 잡아. 그 롱원이 잡아 된지지 요 말에 맞도. 제도 요래서.
이 공기 치워야 되네. 공기 치워 말해. 이 공기 치워디 ngaso supo tanga nga di technique dewa kari tento temba dapu to ndrembo ngaso ndrenko no dene ndrojara dene ngaso shenrote ndrenko combat ja ne namshi ndrojara tinoje ne ngaso ndrenko no ni cholo tenrote combat ja dapu sunro titi no jeres. So we're saying that you are not your body, but you do rely on your body. There's the basis, right? There is a basis of being imputed on your body. So there's a relationship between you and your body, right? There is but to say you are your body is a different thing, right? Or to say you are any of your aggregates is a different thing, right? Because when you die, from the Buddhist perspective, you will go to another life, right? And your body stays here. Now, it's also important in Buddhism to really understand, right, that we talk about negating things. Like if you look at the heart of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutra, we say no eyes, no ears, no nose, like this whole thing. What you're negating really is this type of existence, this overly reified, inherent existence that we perceive and that we think things exist, but we're not negating the actual existence of things, right? So we still hold, Buddhism still holds that things exist and that they're effectual and that there are actions, but it just doesn't exist in the solidified way that we perceive it. Did that answer your question?
I think I know very little, so I'll probably go on.
Okay, sure.
I know very little. So.
It's no problem. You're welcome to ask as many questions as you want. It's really fun.
Penangaso tanda da zan nga za chi salu mo bujin kha yora te ngaso nawshi te yabaje ani nawshi te ngaso phombola ne ne ka chane ani ngaso shi ngaso chiwa la ra chiwa mare chilo mar chiwa chiwa yo
fuku
an cha kyun chi chiwa
네.
ngaso chiwa za jora chiwa za te kar re zana ngaso nawshite 수지가 nawshite 폼보도 카트네 로슨도 가서 치와자 치와자 아 딘디지레스 폼보도 가서 나 다자 사운드 통사티
니랑 디 테마세티 넘버십 대형 다요 말에
다요 말에서 얘는 가서 다 텔라테네 nawshite 나 나자 사운드 코르다 줘라 텔라테네 존데요
Yeah, so for example, when you die, of course, right, you know, these coarse aggregates all stay here, and then this sort of subtle consciousness goes on to the next life. Now, even that subtle consciousness, you can't actually say is you, but it's on dependence of that you can be posited, essentially.
단단해서 오만 집안을래 안에 같이 자나 되는 도바요사 몸벌레레스 레네 같이 그 폼보데 다레세 네 같이 폼보 초바 다레세 ane pombo to chi tinde dare zane mombo dosati zone pagane ne dazati yo mares ena yo ngaso lendi teji chopi dazane tanga tanye tasa le don dribo li dinaja sha to ne na shinisa teji chopi daza tinde tobi tasa ga da tinde chi yora ma to pa rongoni topa tinde yorongoni ta tinde daji yo mares
there's a famous Buddhist text called Entering the Middle Way, because I mean, this question is actually not a silly question. It's a very important question that is sort of the relationship between the self and the body has really been something that's been debated for thousands of years, right? Like, and so in this entering the middle way, of course, the Buddhists are the Chandrakirti, this Indian pundit, is refuting the other positions, people that hold that the body is the self, that the collections of the aggregates are the self, right, that the shape of the aggregates, there's different sort of views of the relationship between what you are and these aggregates that we can see. And so he is sort of refuting these different views. And basically what happens, what the Tibetan Buddhist perspective gets down to is that nothing exists in this really solid way that we sort of perceive it and expect it to, this inherently existent way, but things exist purely by being sort of imputed by the mind. I know you said you're really new, that probably means nothing to you, but I know you said you're really new, that may not mean much to you, but there's
I don't understand it, I mean, as much as...
Yeah, it's like, His Holiness often describes it as this labeling. It's like, on the basis of the body you think I, right? That's sort of a very simple way to understand it, right? But there's nothing to find, right? There's no I to be found, right? Even though it feels like there should be, right? We really want there to be an I, but you can't ever find it. That's kind of it. But that's the idea, right? So when you die and your subtle consciousness is going on, right? You're still not that subtle consciousness, but on the basis of that consciousness, you can label I. And that mere labeling in the sort of subtlest view is all that actually exists. And that's a very subtle point. So don't if it doesn't make total sense now, don't worry, it doesn't make total sense to most people.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
If we're not our bodies, then when we do experience afflictions and sometimes intense afflictions, why do we also feel them as much in the body as in the mind? Like for me, when I feel attachment, not only is it deeply, I mean, mental, emotional, but it has a corresponding intensity. And for me, it's my shoulders and my chest.
Sure, that's a good question.
So I feel it in my body.
Yeah. Those feelings arise. Kungi tiwa karisana. Natsu pungom me nayang. The da pungom me na. Karitini nga the dukchak the nyumong gina. Natsu sukbogi nanga soro의 식진 보상기래.
가르쳐 연조치.
Natsu da pungom 말해. 딘저인도 가르치네 디 두차 숙진포 중나 게나 가르치네 디 숙복이 낭라디 서로 신청 계기래 공쪽 게나 딱 대풍범매나 가르치네 디 숙복이 낭라디 서로 디 뉴몽 테라 데네기 서로 숙복이 낭라 계기래
pana dazena ngazena pombo mares yenayo ngaso dating pombo ti ngare ten ngaso trade yores ane pombo la ane peno katse chona ne susal kanga cha to tindi ane sal kanga katse shi chimbo chana zupu madya to tindi yo koni tende yeso to ronji so de yores yena ngaso yan trade yores
kari
chashi 털잖아. 털바잖아. 배나가서 마이나 레트야지라 너데요레스. 다데 폼보 마레라 폼보도 다마레. 이나 가서 가르사운더 너네 살루톤 폼보티 나이 제 예수서 아니 폼보라 펜노 펜바죠 노바카르잖아. 폼보도 나레 제 예수서 아니 티게 가서로 살로 강아 제데요레스. pombo no bachita chete pombo te ngare tene desara pombo te ngare tene de yora tinde so to pombo no ba kase cha cha ke saulu te ngai sa te no ba chores ane ngaza saulu kanga chite wote ane samde ne pombo te la ne ayo so to tensa yo so saulu kanga to samde kase chona ne zubu ma dia to tinde and tende
we have to make a clear distinction between saying like the self is and the aggregates are different, right? So the self isn't the aggregates and the aggregates aren't the self, but that's not to say that they're not closely linked, right? That they're not closely related, right? So they're very strongly, they've arisen together in this life, well, they have a very strong connection, right, in this life. And so in the same way that, right, if somebody harms your arm or your hand or something, you think, oh, I've been hurt. Right, it's the same thing. If your mind is upset, it's also affecting your body, right? So there is a very close relationship, right? But that's a different thing than saying one is the other thing, right? In that sense, they would be sort of inseparable if it was the other thing.
Pena ngandrawiche ti combat ngi gitere tene ngi combat tene ne ngati combat el kale shaba jawch le kale ne ti combat el nyotanda cho chabanda shichombo to combat ma jigdoje tende chena tinoje nga saul kanga shichombo yores yena nyima chikare ti combat chorogo to mareta jembache kodangoni tele tis ne jene nga ti combat ngi to mai ba ha kondores ha kondoti jemandi combat el kar chona tende chena ne ngala saul kanga cho tende masoza ti shichoma teso tende karezana dame ba tozene oh tat pomboteso damai ba todute ane sal deato ane ngaso dame ba to nguyone so to gozate tirabuchires
Dinga so de dinga de kangwa tengla mare ti
pena ti combating i mare yena combating i grezane satene tege yores satene combating i combare tene de yora ne teso ti combattelane chaba tong shichimbo combati so ma jigto chen ramanda combating demond kasechena nga sang kanga yores the combating i tere tene ne nga ye nyausu cha to ne le kale kar te ngana combatil jawres ne nauji ti kodangon de combat choro ko to mare me jimba ke tere laura ne ngaro ngone o combating i tere mundu me jimba ke tere ndo cha tindi chwa chele te ngaso pena dame pasaje ngaso dame pa to tindi ne tomba ni to jene libo to yola chaje me ba chanto jora jinchame ba chato te tindi chires
So for example, say you have this house and you're renting this house and this you've done a lot of work on this house. It's really nice. You love it, right? Like say the started raining and water was dripping and damaged it, and you did all this work to sort of renovate it and fix it, and then it got damaged again. So you're doing all these things. You're making all this energy and effort to take care of this house, and you're really thinking of it as your house, right? You're really attached to it. But then one day the owner, the actual owner, the landlord shows up. It's like, oh, it's not your house. In fact, someone else is moving in next, right? And then you sort of suddenly you're realizing, oh, this was never my house, right? So it's sort of like that with the body and selflessness, right? When you really understand this idea of selflessness, right, it frees you up from a lot of this attachment to the body that causes us a lot of suffering and difficulty.
Banangaso me pombo me lete zat da zat nga zat ti mayena yo ina kechimboresa kar kechimboresa ngaso ani chuchenanda ani leka chenanda kiwa chama mombulo pentok leka chi dogona ne te pombo tala mate tameres pombo tala matena ngaso ne kiwa ngaso zat ani sosa joba joza tichayo 제타요 말. 딘데서 폼보티 다 마이나 나 마이나 폼 가서 나시도 폼볼라 가서 니프파데 폼보티 사 첨부 차대요 그래서.
So we talk about selflessness and we're talking about this idea that I'm not my body, but or not my aggregates. But it's also important to remember that this body, these aggregates are really important, right? We need these things, right? This is the basis upon which we can actually improve ourselves. We can practice the path. We can do a lot of things. So it's not that this body is not important or it's not something that we need. It's really the basis of the whole path for us right now. But we have to sort of get rid of this incorrect view of it.
그 좋아요한테 가르다 논출 리톰보아 ngamalao nyushira chemanyolo sura tende isu ta dato dameza ta tisong ta dibu nguni shegena ta shesheg mudus ta dibu ta dibu za ko dibu raji kat nochul tomarla nyu chenga chel tombane ta dibu to ko dibu raji shegena kale khabon raji.
Yeah, so it's hard to fully explain the idea of self and selflessness. It gets sort of complicated and subtle, so it's difficult to explain it just very simply.
Su korokene yama tatonene chushenyenanda ane pelo chenanda tendi chenen ramba chenene tis lungulin chadya to tendi ramba chene yorama tombone ta chetonga dame baza to ane ta tiso tombani za tis tezapun sentombo da tendi isosa this carbon regeres.
Yeah, so these ideas of emptiness and selflessness are things that are difficult at first, but if you just sort of study and continue studying and practice, that you will develop more and more understanding about it.
Ani tiwayona tar katwayona tondira naso doleche.
Yeah, so please, anybody ask questions, you're welcome to ask as many questions as you want. Taruna, if you have questions.
So the da is a conceptual idea. So da
Mare ndichi mare.
Yeah, so
Mata cheropa kashi kengama da tab ngaso chena da yo mare lara. Ni cheropa kashi to mombo sitando nomba jonto sopa mombo sen. Kashi ka da tabando gayora kashi ka da meta pare zelindo. Takon ra mandando ne. Do san ra manda mombo jora. Teso chuma kane ngaso kyoga da zati yo mare zene. Pakaja yora. Ronguni tope dasa. Cheto da yo mares. Ina ngaso da zat karares. Ngaso tani pa make ta zapi da yora mato. Cheto ne da yo mares ne.
I wasn't sure what your question was, but da is the Tibetan word for self. Da.
because self, you cannot find self.
Let me translate.
Okay.
So this is a big debate, right, that has happened for over thousands of years. Like, what is the self? Is the self permanent? Some people say the self is this non-changing phenomena. We say permanent, but it's a non-changing phenomena. Some people would say that the self is this phenomena that's impermanent or non-static, that's constantly changing. What the Buddhists assert essentially is that the self, we say there's no self. Of course, what we mean is there's not this self that exists in this impossible way. There's not this like overly solidified view of self. What there is the self that's merely imputed by the mind, right? That's sort of merely labeled by the mind on the basis of the aggregates, but it can't be found when you search for it. So, yeah.
Ni nombi chantanolo ne dandonke to mandonke chirires. Ne tanjawa andrabjena tantatina yashan rabji yeze teura. Ko kararezena ane lindrich tej chopi dazena mando ngazap. Ngazap yores. Motoni, nga zat yo marina, nga thousand lindik teji chopi, nga thousand, or tindiji yoras and shares.
In the Tibetan tradition, we talk about these different pinit systems, these sort of different levels of views of the self and reality. And so the one that is held as the sort of most subtle and most highest is called prasangika. And in that view, it's this idea of the self that's merely labeled by the mind. So if we just say self, we're thinking of this like really overly concrete self that doesn't exist. And then there's this merely labeled self. And the important thing is that this merely labeled self is the self that goes from life to life and which sort of serves as the receptacle for the continuum of karma and path.
Penangas Oman Jubanala da Pombo Darezene Dogachira. Nitel character Pombo Darez, Pombo Sobati Dare, and a Pombo Rerewa, Comba Rerewa Darezene, Paririne Ga, Pena, Shintal Pijara, Shintan Koluyo, Shinta. And Shinta the candidate, Shinta Kayati Shintare, and Shinta Sobati Shintare, and Shinta and Kolu the Shintare, and that in the Papi journey, that Umanjiban to remove Shea.
Again, in Chandrakirti's book, The Entering the Middle Way, there's this, when we talk about the self, there's a lot of discussion about is the self the parts, is the self the collection, is the self the shape. There's these sort of different ways people have thought about what is the self, right? What are we saying is I when I say I? And there's a very classic example. They use a chariot, of course, I guess, because in India in the 7th century there were lots of chariots, maybe. But they use this chariot, the parts of a chariot. We could use a car. So you look at the chariot and you go, where is the chariot? What is the chariot, right? Is the chariot the parts? Is the chariot the collection of the parts? Is the chariot the shape of the parts? Like where, if you analyze the chariot, where is the chariot in the chariot?
Pena Azo the Kauchala Pijane, that Kashiki, the Kauchati Gene, Comba Kauchati, the Kaucha resin, the Kaucha car resin, Azo Kautupatana, the resin, Zuchur. Anita Kaucha Soba the Kaucha resin, Kozokupa Shashirin, Tombo Comba Yachipi, Nita Kaucha resin, New Yonjo Yachipi. Kaucha, chair, or ticket. Comba Yachit Satin, and the Kaucha Revese Tiwachiton. And you enjoy Yachit, and Katsabet Tundu. And it Yella Riri Nirelana, and Kaucha Combat Kaucha Reve. Or Tindichine, Pajanjichin, it's not in the Soliton.
So, for example, this chair, right? If you look at the chair, right, you think, okay, well, this normally speaking, we can say there's a chair, right? And we're not wrong to say there's a chair. But if you start looking at the chair and you start looking for the chair, you can sort of piece by piece take away a piece of chair and sort of think about when does it stop becoming a chair? Where is the chair, right? And if the collection of the parts is the chair, then really, if you disassemble, you take all the way the pieces away, you should still have a chair in all those parts. So you can then apply the same kind of thinking, right, for the chair and the chariot to our body and the sort of looking for the self.
So self, because we cannot find self, right? So it's not composite products, but can we say self is a concept, it's conceptual thought.
Well, which self? Do you mean the self that exists or the self that doesn't exist? Yeah, but there's
the self we cannot. When we look for the self, we cannot find it, right?
You're talking about the self that exists?
No. I want to ask, is self midaba? Because it's the conceptual thought.
But so there's two selves. It's just, I want to know which one to ask about, because we have the self we project that doesn't exist. It's negated by selflessness, and then there's the actual person that does exist. You're talking about the person. You're talking about the person that exists.
I'm not talking about the physical existence. I'm talking about like when Geshe asked, when we see the chair, and then we look for the chair.
So are you an impermanent phenomenon, basically?
Yeah.
Okay. That ngini begi dakte dakpa yorebe.
Ngatawi.
Me ngata.
Ngatati. Ne tandanga so. Tenga tata za komaso ngatati. Ngatsangola ne ngatso lindrik teji chopi ngatsa za chiora dazena. Ngatsa yores. nga tsao za tsama tsam chindo ti kuwa shibu chore zera ina ti kare na ti tapa jaya na ta tinga sakha hakuma
namgyun di ni chake di midakpe kita tangtape kita ni ka yore di marebe di rangi jiksana di rangi ba nama
ta tanjewa ki nga tsao ngo ja pi dati pache
midakpe mena di
lindik teji kyoba chao ma res ra mitaba yina yin nga tsao za kandi chi jana yo tinga taba to mitaba khatsa chane sakha chi lao shima so ina ta lindik teji kyoba nga tsu kar re zana nga tsu mitaba chi mena ane ti jatu kumare pena nga tsu li gewa sa ma gewa sa pacha zana mandu chatso tingu jani yandu jara o tindi iso tsa mitaban rabu chi ma jana kapu rese ina yo nga tsao zane chito nga tsao tsao jati mombu chi ki yo tapa imba choa to tapa imba tea tindi mombu chi yo re
nga tsam di tapa
mara nga tsao zane chito tsao jati yo ra nga tsao zato ta tsao jati ki cho tsa mombu chi yo re nga ti maya chi ina nga tsao yo a chi o tindi iso chito nga tsu pacha jasa ti nga tsao ti ra tindi iso tsu pacha jasa ki nga tsao ti mitapa ina ma to driyo samare
di ngay kunga kari chiwa la kari linking kiyan di
mitapa ina driyo
So we had a long discussion about this. It was a little complicated about the mirror eye, right? Because it's what is this mirror eye? What is the nga tam? The tam is negating something, right? So what is it negating? But what we came down to is because the mirror eye has to be where the karma is being made, is sort of being is the sort of receptacle, the continuation of the karma. It has to be impermanent. So otherwise, it wouldn't be in fact. No, midapa.
Midapa.
Yeah. Because otherwise you couldn't change. You couldn't continue the path. You couldn't practice the path. You couldn't have karma.
Mitaba majana pena tangaso tanda tsindela ni tanda ngaso litan dribu mombo gya to magya mombo ji sara ne kya chima to ten chuma pachango jane nga cha ten pacha ja ne kya chima pacha to ye seote tinde so to pag jasa te mitaba chima to mena taba chingul jawa chebi ni ba to te jaza tin ruto
Yeah, so for example, like in Prasangika, this mirror eye is the thing where the sort of karma is kind of, you say it's kind of stored, it's not, but you say so the imprints of karma are carried with this mirror eye from life to life, and then later on they sort of they sort of come about, they fruition, right? And if it was a permanent phenomenon, that wouldn't be possible. It would just never change, right?
Yeah.
So it has to be a impermanent phenomena. Permanent and impermanent in this are sort of misleading terms. It's really like static in the sense of not changing or changing. So it's not permanent in the sense of always existing. But unfortunately it's a term in English that's gotten used. So it's one of those, that's what we get used to. More?
ane kama kashin tu ra, tinga su chwa chile chen rir. Ane choro zo no pensa samso, choro lo samso yana kozo shiana rir.
We could talk about whatever we want. He wants a discussion. One thing I'll point out is that even among Buddhism, there's a lot of discussion about what the self is, right? And there's these different levels of philosophy. And some Buddhist schools say that the consciousness is the self. That it Prasangika sort of strips even that away and says nothing is findable, even the self, right? And so it's becomes very subtle. But what do you think you are? If you look for yourself, what do you think you find? I mean, I know for me, I feel like I am in here somewhere, right? I mean, it really feels like there's some me inside here looking out. I mean, that's what it looks like.
I think that would be for me too.
Yeah, that's what it feels like. Yeah. Di lapati ngene ki nyomo karigen se nga chungchung di nangla yere ngi mikpati par tongi yere. Di tsoro yere. Nga di jichi cheki me ine tinjo ki tsoro ngala
Pena ngaso gonjana jogato chegaza handan ta chegati karrezana susu chibudetene tisosal nga kawandos nanji nga sa chimbo shitsede nga ti kawando saluto ane nga metaparendo mares otikol saluto andeati ngaso chegaza ne yojindro to pisak kuarawala yashati ne chegateres ane janeti joga isoti stichito membate ajana lut tempo chamato yongupu nil sabuntuala chendrayo mares.
So it's really good, if you want to sit and do meditation, to really sit there and do this kind of analysis, like thinking about where am I, what, really just explore that question for yourself. And so when we talk about meditation, there's of course these two types of meditation. There's this, what you can say is like concentration or placement or single-pointed meditation, right, where you're just sort of, the benefit of that is that it does bring a certain amount of peace and health to your body and your mind, but it won't allow you to really understand these questions, right? So you should also do this analytical meditation where you're really sort of sitting there, relaxed, but thinking, investigating, where is the self, where is the I, where do I feel like the self is, and where does it actually exist there?
I'm thinking like, right now I feel exhausted, very tired. Okay, that's a very
tired,
strong feeling.
Yeah.
So I am feeling exhausted, but then I have to think, where is I? I cannot find that I. So who is feeling exhausted?
Yeah. Tangi somebody nga tering tisnei tangjigidu. Nga tangjigidu sama tangi ya ting nga te kabayo re. Nga di nga te tsina rakimare. Yena yang di nguni chene nga tangjigidu la nga di nga kayo re.
Nga so mompochi ta namjen pacha nga za nge lapa nge kapa nga za su ngongi lete ra tati nguni taro re tene tsawa chimbo nga nagandu nga kanga tegandu zen nga sa chimbo santra che nga ta shisa re tene saulu tona ne kanga de chiri ndo ane yash ta nga kare yo reza ne je chonchika sa che ne je salu tona yo tinna sa pa che yo sansala nga na za ka na ndo nga ka yo reza su nga sa che mo se kande yo ne yo tikol tomba ni kol pa salu tona yo pento yo tinde yo ye sa so kande salu tona.
Yeah, I mean it's true. This can actually be very helpful, right? Like when there is a sort of normal way of thinking about self that's not necessarily wrong, but then what happens sometimes is that we start to hold the self to be really solid, really concrete, we overly exaggerate the importance of this self, and then say for example, if you get sick or something, then you think, oh, woe is me, right? Like it seems horrible. And then so if you can do this kind of analysis, it can be a benefit in that situation because it sort of reduces some of that exaggerated sense of self,
Tanda nanjing.
Nato di nangin samsang di nga sum samotang kiresti rangshingi chupe nga nato namgyungi Geshe sheki nga di nato di tope daksang ki nga teto sum samsang di nakyo mare.
Ta nga zati ta mochisho de karrezana so rongoni topi nga choncho sound rongoni topi nga ti yomara yana nga so rongoni toba choman thonda yeso te nga za shik chimba
ni kongi namgyung ti nga tangchegi du tinang lap nga di norgi mare
jitoto na jite thanyela nga thongchegando nga nagando za jite yontrala tin digo yores nga nagando nga gangjogo nga sonjego yozena digres te la chore yana tate pasalo tone tang nga sonjegando nga karchene sonjego nga te karindo za patsate yo rongone tape tato roje tape tato yomela ti pasalo tone jite thanyela digo yoreda nga nagando nga choman digo yorete mandre zay yomara nochunola inayo pa zesona nga ti kantin do zene ti ragmare za shede mato 네 나트로가 칼라자고 this 소망아서 나트렌디 말해서 디게 차대다 말해.
So the main thing the important thing in terms of Buddhism, what we're talking about is that this what we say is inherently existent self, this sort of way of imagining the self to exist that is impossible, that's overly exaggerated, right? That sense of self doesn't exist, right? That, for example, in your example, oh, I'm very tired today, like that's not an incorrect thing to say, right? Oh, I am putting on my clothes, I am going to the store, right? These are true sentences, they're not wrong, right? So that there is this self that can do these things, and you're not wrong to use those words. But the thing is that the way that self exists, when you examine where does that self exist, you examine how you imagine that self exists, and then you go look for it, you can't find it, right? So nothing is ever actually findable when you search for it, right? And that, understanding that, the importance of that is very profound.
Yeah, I agree with that. Especially, I also have the experience when I feel sad, that if I analyze that way, it do help. It does help. It does help.
Yeah.
Right? But right now I feel exhausted. Then if I want to turn that, into benefit me,
sometimes you just have to rest, right?
yeah, it's quite difficult. Yeah.
It turned what into benefit you? The being tired?
It's because it's very, I just feel, like you said, maybe I just need rest. And if there is one way, I just analyze non-self, and that they can help me to reduce the tiredness.
I don't know that will make you less tired. That make you feel less sorry for yourself about being tired.
Maybe for great practitioner.
nga nguni nga thang chegidu nga yene nga dinje di tsena marapna nga tatung thang chegidu di nga di pin dinje pintogi mare sim gyobo changa nuni sim gyobo changa di pin
pena ngaso soma ngaso su za 쳔보지 수술 강하면 잡아지 설로 동거 요래서 얘나 띠 똥똥 마시나 아니 띠 강하 시치리 나간도 나라 징다만다라고도 전 띠쇼로 설로도는 제톤의 수술 강하지 트이고는 메제마가 강하 트이나다 konta 강하지 트이고 네 띠데 설로도는 수술을요 강하 터바지 된도아 강하 터바 강할 하마 강할 하마진 텐도 딜리요 나서 당아 가리오레잖아 요 디솔파 전식에 산자 동반 수승원이 띵득 파시 제소나 네 수사 침부치나 제고체 네 수수 강가도 tel라테니 시초린도한테 땅 네마 그파 고마잖아 수수 뇨아용 그 몸보게티
Yeah, I mean, so the thing is, right, if we hold this overly exaggerated importance or sense of self, right, then, when bad things happen, they just seem terrible, they seem horrible, it's like the end of the world, and then that creates problems not only for ourselves, but we create problems for other people and all of that. But if you're able to relax that, if you're able to have a more realistic view of the self and how the self exists and your own importance, right, then all these problems become a little more workable or a little easier. It's not like the problem just goes away, but you're not exaggerating it, right? It doesn't seem like everything is quite so difficult.
Can I add to this?
Sure.
Spoke about being sick. So I've had 2 major brain surgeries in the last 6
Oh, wow.
months.
Oh.
Yeah, I had a tumor on my optic nerve, and then I hemorrhaged right after that.
Kongi lepa di dawa chuki nguma, te nangne di kongi lepa di shakche temani jungsong.
Tumor on my optic nerve. So I definitely, I don't know if it was vanity or what happened was I was overly associated with my body pre-surgery, and that kind of radically changed.
Yeah, they do change. They wake you up a little.
A lot.
They do.
Which explains why I'm here.
Yeah, I mean, I started in Buddhism. I got skin cancer,
No, I'm sorry.
and it made me. I think it's okay now, but it's about 10 years ago. It just made me really, take things more seriously.
So I definitely understand I'm not my body, but my mind is a far scarier place to be.
Sure.
So it's kind of confusing. If I'm not my body and I'm not my mind, then who
Yeah.
am I and when? What
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Remember, we're never saying, it's really important Buddhism, we're never saying you don't exist. It's how you exist, right? Just remember that's important. Kongi tiwa di kongi pungbo di supo me kongi supo yomare. kongi supo mare. Temase kongi number sheba mare. Denjendu nga kawayure. Samatankere. Kongi this sort of denjuyare. Kongi sort of supo tang number sheba madok nga kawayure. kongi tiwa de. Kongi tokpa.
Retangaso ngaza de kawayure tsene pombo nga mare de ra number shiba no mare ne ngamondu tene ne ngamalanya chi ngamondu tene ane strane cheta la longa chenta lo ra tanta to chenta ngamondu tene kashi chono shikchimbolane strangke tinde yorezane ane jonti sono shede yorez inate karezane ting ngato tombani tonto ane tisalo tonto te tata te ranche yo mares kas ranche te sono ngamundu tene chono jo strano kiate yo mares ngalo shede
I mean, this is something that happens is when you do this analysis, and there's lots of past meditators and people have talked about this, is that, yeah, it can, you sort of, suddenly you think, oh, I don't exist, right? Because you're looking for it, you can't find it. It can be kind of scary. And it is possible people in the past have taken that too far and have thought, oh, I really don't exist, right? Which is not what we're saying. And so if you get, while in some ways it can be a good thing to sort of feel that, right, you do have to remember that the correct view ultimately is that you do exist. You just exist in a very different way than you think.
Pena tangaso ngame dame zantina su pa ngaso karerezana topping gune pa tane yod tin su na topping gune pa ta samato pa ki yorungune trabata ranjeji trabaza tingune mandu tene ne tindi chetona ne tombani tene tata cha ko amato yo chenta lo to tanta lo za ta tindi mombu no sra
So the way it's described, right, is that we are negating this impossible way of existence, this inherently existent, this sort of overly solidified existence. And the way that things exist is actually really quite subtle, so you're not used to it. So it seems, all we ever are used to is this inherent existence. So when you negate it, right, it does seem like you're negating yourself. But what we're talking about is that the only way things can exist, the way it's taught, is through the sort of labeling process, imputation by the mind. But the correct view ends up in a place where you do exist. But it can be scary, and it's in some ways it's a good sign as long as you sort of keep little guardrails on it. Don't let yourself think you don't exist, because that's never what we're saying.
Tendek ko to tombani ko te pa hachon chapo tezabu salomombo tonomato le lapo tezo ko chocho nganda chene lumombo non chijonde tanda yabu chaku mesa.
So we talk about emptiness and dependent arising. So it can be, I sort of suggested this, that one thing you can do is think about dependent arising, because it's kind of the positive aspect of how things exist versus negating the way things don't exist. So that's another way to think about it. But so what we talk about is that emptiness, this lack of this impossible way of existing, and dependent arising or imputation, right? They're sort of joined. The understanding of one should complement the understanding of the other, but that's very hard. It's very hard to bring these together. But ultimately, the goal is that when you think about emptiness, you see dependent arising. When you see dependent arising, is the idea that all things exist independent on it. Things exist independent on other things, right? That there's nothing from its own side. So ideally, these things would come together and basically become sort of two sides of the same coin, but that's very difficult to do. I, for example, have been studying this for a long time, and I still haven't quite got that completely figured out.
It's going to take me a while.
This is like right down to the most subtle thing.
No, it's gonna
But
take
you could start at the top level, right? There are course levels of this that are accessible, and then you just sort of slowly brain get used to it, and you go down.
Sorry, I'm asking
No,
so many
no, no,
questions. I have
please.
one last question from the lesson session day before. So he spoke about like every time there's an affliction that arises, then you apply the corresponding antidote to it.
Yeah.
And so I've kind of tried to implement this over the last 2 days, and it's helped a little bit. But I find that the sensation in my body is a little bit of an extreme to overcome. For instance, I did meditate on the flesh rotting away a little bit when I thought of that particular person, and that kind of did seem to help. But it instantly, I could feel my chest very heavy. So to sit with that was very uneasy.
It's very difficult to do. Yeah, I mean, it's also something that takes a long time to make these real changes. But kongi tiwa di kong kirangi nguma nangshin sungba nangshin di nyumong rela di nyimba yore. Nyimbo yore. I kong kirangi sungba nangshin di duchak Geshe gi mitela di kari di rusung jabo di gom gyapayan. Di pinto jung yine di tetu nge sukpo gi nanga di tsoro di chapo jung sung. Dindre di gomna di kapo duk. Di kanji yina di sim gi tsoro di skala kapo jung. Sim mari di sukpo gi
zubul chorno thing. Kengaso samki gauja samki saulu tone zubul chorno tetuati sand tsichiba tone saulu yapu zena kota saulu shichimbo tontoy pitares.
Okay, so this is maybe an example, a sign that you're sort of trying too hard, pushing too much.
Tanda ngaso nomba kashi gaujane ne toni to jonshik sa jala cha to ne ta ramba mandra nyimbo mumba chawtinga lil choa leg yo rezer. Kashi chasha jiandra to chik zik zand liji papa dandra to otendi samka saulu to ne choa shik chimbo chil te samka saulu shik chimbo to na ne choa leg pena ngaso Lamanja ji pamanda ji tene ji gad choa ji lewde jene lig gyoandre michi sha to liji papa do.
But the gyopso the kongi the tsoro dendri nangshin the yubita or the kongi the usu gyapki da yore.
Ko saulu tone saulu ta karaj ton jana saulu tene saulu tempo ji ton to ayo ba tenkires. Saulu shokara tene tempo ji ton ji sautalo choa shi chimbo ji lewde taro lil choa di gyndra ji lewdes. Mana tako saulu shi chimbo to nyimbo ji ashene ane lila ji madhyandra chano lezera. Di leat karas saulu tempo to stichi pa tendi ji ta shia ma karan de lokor. Ta ki konda shia no shire. Sheka.
So there are also lots of examples, right, when meditators are meditating on infinite and all these things, they have other kinds of feelings, like the hair stands on up at their heads, or they get like shivers or sensations in their body. So of course there is a connection between your body and your mind. I mean, that is certainly true. I mean, are you concerned, like, you're just making sure you're not doing something wrong, or that, like this bad feeling, like this, you just...
Because it's almost compulsive, so I'm just trying to kind of put it in a perspective, and I wanted to leave me as soon as possible. So that would explain that I know I'm putting too much pressure.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to leave me, because it's been around for a while.
The attachment or this feeling? Both, yeah.
But I'm acutely aware of the feeling now that I'm aware of the attachment.
I see. Kongi sunba di ngune chini kongi di chorwa teyang ni kongi di chak di bang di yore. Yinayang tenzang di kongi nika di kore di chorwa nombo jabo chasong. Di mutuni di hakoya gi jabo tongi yore.
The tangazo saulu tone gonjana kandre yena 카실라 즈불 따자 tsewang 라마다 몸불레 요사래 이나 되게 가르라잖아 리불 쫀자도 리불 카트 차지마도 개체 두고 말해 얘나 텔라 요 자자마잖아 살로도 바시기차로부터 텐디체네 칼레몬부스 전에 삼바 마데아도 뇽바차도 요티 르도 몸보요 얘나 탈랑케 수수 살로톤도 든든도 문도 타키 제나마도 가장게 적 파리시 살강아 시치리치리 또 차시치리치리라 네 데네간 상전에 텔레체가 개침바라마도 가자도 마신 뇽바차시야
So, yeah, so back to the first thing, it is important not to push when you're meditating, right? You really should be relaxed as much as possible. And there are lots of examples of people meditating like and pushing too much, and it really creates a lot of problems for them. So you're not trying to push your mind, and it is important to not try to force your mind, right? And that if it becomes uncomfortable or something, then you may just stop for a minute and take a break. Let it settle down and then start again, right? That because there are lots of examples of people that, and I'm not talking about 1 or 2 sessions. We're talking about people that in retreat who've meditated for years, but have been pushing too hard over years, right? That can cause a lot of damage, right? So I'm not saying you meditating once or, but you know what I mean. So you just it should be something that you gently are doing. Lots of people have essentially driven themselves crazy by pushing their mind too hard.
Maybe I had brain surgery.
Yeah, you're not going to drive yourself crazy in 1 or 2 sessions. But you just have to be gentle with your mind.
Take susula dirin do to yarin do penton do to mundo ta and pet usumaja toncheba jandana and indigo tisi jan ton nisuja yo gon tisi but it's yerambu kanga meba chan in the chazate najer nyense kase goja keoma litomba shikshobajate take a kanga
trigger. So I mean for great meditators who've done this for a long time, then they can really push and they know how to do this. But meditation's a skill. It takes time. It's not easy to learn. And it's at the beginning, just a little bit and rest and a little bit and rest and take a break, and don't push your mind. Don't force your mind, right? You're really just going to work with it slowly. We're talking about slow changes.
Ne gauk develop to some gajane tanset internet susu kanti chao yo meton de yo meton ne jonti sono bisat sono mo she yo ra otiso tani tiso tatolon mo she do tiso nya ke chimbore.
Yeah, so it's also very useful to read about meditation, read from books from great masters and great teachers about how to meditate. That's really helpful. There's lots of things online. I posted Mingyur Rinpoche is a fantastic meditation instructor.
Geshe chone matene sushi pok sejaje. Tinyin katsambo kale kopon.
It's very dangerous if you push too much. You don't want to do that. You don't want to force your mind. Thanks for coming back.
Alhamdulillah, I have written one question.
Oh, you did? Okay, sorry.
No problem. We can do it next time also if it's too late.
How is doubt and affliction when the Buddha said, okay, doubt the taitsom, the tukpa, the karichine, the nyumong, kanginsana, the natsu sangegi, natsu la the tangma takcha chegari. Then the taitsom karichine nyumong chegari.
Titsala ne nyumo yinke to mayinke cheru yore. Titsala tonjaji. Tanda tonjaji titsala. Tonjaji tisa to Tomanjaji tisa. And Tonjaji tisa tela, and it turned the Gewa Chola Yanjana, and the Gewa Chanta. And Magia Shondana, Magia Chanta, Tisal. Cheto Tisa Nyomo Ches that, a Tisal Chetomo Che. Conda Tisa Nyomo Chat Karazan, and legendary Dotomondo, Tayo Samaras and Tobaza. Tikaras and Nyomo Shishiboke. Nacho Marupa Claire Shichimbula, or Tinditone, Kyang Achimundusene, or Tindichene, 간데 티사셔. 그 티사때 야부지 말았어.
Yeah. So there's when we say doubt, right, of course, there's many different types of doubt, and what we're talking about here is afflictive doubt. So there's non-afflictive doubt, right, and then there's a doubt that's an afflictions. And so here we're talking about this doubt that's tending toward a disbelief in things like the sort of the Four Noble Truths or the Three Jewels and things like that, and that is arising because of our ignorance. So it's an affliction. But we're not talking about all doubts in general, right? And certainly there are doubts that are virtuous that lead you to analyze and to think here. So we're specifically talking about afflictive doubts that are leading you toward a disbelief in things like the Four Noble Truths and the Three Jewels.
네, 저도 티사자 로타진 타니스 도바zen 루 아니 진이바 타마칭 로타진 타니스 도바 티사근 체니라 루트레도 마레 제네 사울리시토 타마초바 네티노네네 타티레토 티레 타티사레 자조라 튼제지 티사 타티카레 파나 손지요도 메 손진도 제네 네 티사 제소나 티 게와사 야자요레스 네 손진도 또 먼도 손진 먼도 제야도 아니 기앙하신도 또 먼도 제네 다 티사티
So if we want to divide a doubt into sort of afflictive and virtuous, right? So doubt that is tending toward a disbelief, say, for example, in past and future lives, that would be afflictive. A doubt that is tending toward belief in past and future lives but is not sure would be a non-afflictive doubt.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, we're definitely not saying questioning is wrong. That's definitely not it. Okay. Nice.
Thanks
for coming back.
No, it was, this is such a privilege to